Today we are on the Isle of Bute and we are heading up to St Blane's Chapel. We've just made it up the big incline and I'm going to have a wee seat at the oak tree for 5 minutes. There is the chapel behind us, and what is quite interesting is as we pan round that headland at the end of the trees, the grey on the horizon, that is Holy Island. St Blane's would have started off life as a monastic site. The building we will see today is post-monastic and it was built in around 1135. What is worth pondering as we have a look around is that the builders of some of the oldest remains of this church could well have been Norse. Bute fell into Stuart ownership at the end of the 12th century, and the island and her lands were gifted to Paisley Abbey in around 1204. What we see today was heavily restored in the 1870s in the height of the Victorian tourist era. Like Kilmartin Glen, we have to wonder whether our Victorian ancestors maybe used a bit of artistic license. The graveyard certainly shows signs of being moved around a good bit. This is a 10th century hogback tombstone. Traditional tales will suggest that that's St Blane's tombstone. It's not. It is a Viking who became a settler, his tombstone. The Vikings did quite often use hogbacks. Could that hogback stone be related to Donegal? We'll never know. What is quite unusual in this graveyard is this top section closest to the chapel would have been for monks in its heyday, but then it buried only men, whereas if we go down to the lower graveyard, that's where the women got planted. We are down in the lower graveyard, which is all about girl power. It may seem unusual to have everyone segregated in the graveyard, but actually Irish monastic sites, that was really quite a usual thing. Many of the Celtic abbeys would have had a separate complex for the monks and a separate complex for the nuns. So it kind of really only makes sense that they would have been segregated in death as well. I can't stop looking at this view though. Down in the lower section of the graveyard, we do have this rather impressive slot that would have carried an even more impressive cross. Now this is quite exciting. Down in the women's end of things, we have a beautifully primitive Celtic cross. It's from the 9th century. Must have been a very special lady. This is the remains of the little chapel that would have been part of the monastery, probably in the Dark Ages. The burials inside are medieval date. We'll have a wee look because some still have their carvings. As you can see, it's thought that Cluniac monks resided here in the Middle Ages and that they were the ones very much responsible for the segregation. Here are some of the finds at St Blane's displayed at Bute Museum. This is the well. Folklore would suggest that it's a fairy well and would have magical healing powers. There is also another area here called the Devil's Cauldron. Archaeologists have no explanation for its use, but again, folklore will tell you that a pine tree had magical power to give visions if a sprig of its leaves was left under your pillow for a night, and apparently it grew in the middle of the cauldron. Maybe take that with a pinch of salt. This is the chancel, and of course we have an umbre. This would be 14th century. This is quite interesting. This would originally have been 12th century, but in 1896 the third Marquess of Bute did some restoration, and you can see these sort of layers of tiles, and they are the indicators of where the old stuff is and where he put new stuff in place. So despite me saying earlier that I reckon the Victorians like a wee bit of artistic license, clearly in this site the Marquess was very, very aware of the wealth of history that was sitting here. I'm impressed. This is a good example of a cashel, which is a wall that is built to really make distance between the church and the monastery. The wall behind it is even more interesting. It was built to keep the church and the monastery away from the rabblement. St Blane himself was a rather interesting chap. He was born here on Bute, and the story says that he went to Bangor to study for the priesthood. He studied in Bangor Abbey for 7 years. This is when it gets interesting. After the 7 years, he had enough, decided he would come home, and came home in a boat with no oars on the Irish Sea. Good luck with that one. A good chap, however, to take on camping trips, because it is said that he could produce fire from his fingertips. The last rather tall tale about this man is that he went to Rome to receive his papal blessing, and then he walked home. Now, I've googled walking home from a papal blessing, and that is nearly 500 hours of solid walking, not counting rest stops and miracle stops, because apparently he was known to restore children's sight on the way home. Quite a busy chap, eh, Martin? St Blane's feast day is the 11th of August. He is associated with St Blane's Church in Dumfries historically, and with the Kilblane area of Greenock. Also, Dunblane Cathedral is said to have been founded on the first site used by St Blane. So that was St Blane's. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks to all the folk who support me on the Ko-fi page. Until next time, thank you for watching.